I'm really happy to be talking to you, Paul, today. Could you please introduce yourself and what do you do for business?
Yeah, my name is Paul Walker. I am an organizational development specialist working with Octopi, really great team of people, and we do a bunch of different stuff, all focused on making workplaces a better, more efficient, more human-focused place to work. And so I do a lot of consulting workshops and things of the sort, all specialized in employee experience and self-management ways of organizations working.
Very nice. Could you describe the main stages in your career?
Yeah, that's been an interesting one. It started out as I never had any formal training for this. It was never an intended career path. I was just a basically nameless employee at a company that was implementing self-management concepts, and so I spent a few years just being on that side of it, seeing what it was like, what worked, what didn't work, what I liked and didn't. And eventually I saw pieces of it that really resonated with me, and I wanted to learn more about it for my own benefit and to help other people in that. So I kind of got into doing it there. And then I spent several years implementing self-management at this company, at Zappos, in fact. And so I spent several years doing that. And then in the last year or two, I left to kind of do things on my own and recently joined Octopi so I can take everything I've learned and help more people with it.
Let me ask you this question. Now you are doing your own business. Why at this stage exactly could you take this decision to be independent?
So at the current moment, I don't actually have my own business anymore. I'm now working with a team, Octopi. I joined it. A friend of mine who actually previously worked with me at Zappos recently started up and asked me to join. Prior to that, I was doing my own business, and that was because after I left this large company, there were ways that I knew I wanted to help people in the way that I thought was the best way to help people, in a way that really resonated with me and my morals and my ethics. And I didn't know of any other company out there that would let me do the work in the way that I wanted, that I wouldn't have to deal with the normal, bureaucracy and stresses of a typical job. So I've never wanted to be in business for myself, but I did it for a couple years solely because I didn't think there was a better option out there. And only a couple months ago did I kind of set that aside, because this team of people who were already creating the organization I was dreaming of, a very human focused, very flexible organization, remote and all this stuff, that they asked me to join. And I said, okay, well, now because there's these team of people, I can focus solely on what I know and what I'm good at, and I don't have to worry about all the other business side of things, the taxes, the contracts, all these things. So I can focus my time and passion on what I'm good at and what I know.
Very interesting. What is organizational self-management?
So there's a bunch of different descriptions of this, and although there's some companies that have been doing it for decades, it's only recently started becoming a lot more popular. There's several descriptions out there. My description is, it's just understanding in the workplace, understanding what's expected of you and having the freedom to meet those expectations however you want. So it's just the idea of, instead of a boss having to tell you what to do and when to do it and how to do it and looking over your shoulder to make sure you're doing it in the way they want, it really should work in the same way you probably pay your utilities. The electric company says, pay us $100 by the end of the month. They don't care if you pay cash, they don't care on the 1st or the 30th. Everybody does it in a different way, but as long as you meet that expectation, you can work in whatever way you want. And that's really all self-management is.
So you are getting people to be more self-independent.
Exactly. It's taking away the necessity for there to feel like a manager has to supervise people to make sure they do things in the right way. And instead gives people a lot more autonomy and trust by giving them much clearer expectations. So instead of saying, if you look at job expectations, a lot of times they sound good, but they really mean nothing. You might look at a customer service job and it says, deliver great customer service. But what does that really mean? What that means to me is not what that means to you. we're going to have different expectations of how quickly we answer the phone, how we talk to people, so on and so forth. And that's what leads to a lot of problems in the workplace of like, I think I did a great job, but my boss or my peers are thinking I didn't. But it's just because we have different interpretations of what the work actually is. Whereas if you have a very clear expectation for, a customer service job that says, pick up the phone this quickly, do these things for a customer, and so on, then I can still work with a lot of freedom and do things in my own way. But as long as I hit these three things, I know I've done my job. I don't have to worry about anything. I can go home, confidently sleep that night.
Let me ask you this question. Like now you are getting people to do things from their own decision, following their own minds, following their own thinking. Don't you think that you are increasing the risk factor?
That's a great question. And overall, no. And that's because where I mentioned, it's not just, I have seen companies implement these concepts without understanding the necessities behind them. So I've seen a company say, okay, we're going to trust people to self-manage. And they got rid of all of the rules. There were no policies anymore. And they just said, we trust everyone to do what's right. And it was an absolute nightmare. And the business almost crumbled. And that was because there's a very big difference between taking away all the rules and setting very clear rules. So for example, when you drive around, you probably feel pretty self-managed. You can drive what you want, where you want, go, where you want to. But would you feel safer if they took away all traffic laws?
No.
Yeah, you probably would. That'd probably make traffic even worse than it is. And so that's exactly how it has to be in the workplace, is rather than just having, traditionally it works like a manager makes up the rules as they go at the end of the day. Whatever they say goes. So instead of that, it's just you set very clear rules. You can say, some companies have, unlimited vacation, or some have very specific vacation. But the point is it gets very clear. So they say you can take a total of 40 hours of vacation time every quarter. There's and that is the entire rule. You don't need permission. You don't have to run it by anyone. If you go over that amount, you've broken the rule. It was very, very clear. And there's no gray area in this. And so that's really all it's about, is it's just making the rules so clear that you don't need all these extra levels, but that only works if there's also accountability. So you set these very clear rules and make sure everyone understands and agrees to those rules. And then if they break them, the conversation also becomes a lot easier than at most jobs. Because again, at most jobs, it's like, oh no, I think the manager's saying I didn't. And then we just argue with each other, but they ultimately win. Whereas if we say, oh no, we both sat down and agreed no more than 40 hours of vacation a quarter, and I took more than that. There's no gray area here. I broke the rule, and now I get coached, I get written up, whatever the case is. So it's really just about adding clear rules and making sure people are held accountable to that.
Let me ask you a more difficult question here. Like you are taking the gray areas and you are turning them into black and white, or right and wrong. Okay, what areas exactly are you working on?
Ideally, it's every factor in the company, but that's a very ideal state. Not a lot of companies go to that extreme. And at the end of the day, any progress is better than no progress at all. So some companies, especially just starting out, if they're interested in this concept, but there are a lot of risks with any big change, they might say like, okay, well, we don't want to do all this. So how do we improve a little bit? How do we make our meetings more efficient? And then that's something you can do. You say, okay, well, instead of just everyone showing up into a room and talking over each other, let's implement some rules about how we meet, the order of how we talk about things, have a facilitator in there, things like that. And the rest of the company can still be as chaotic as normal, but this is a little bit of progress. And on the other end, kind of the more ideal, if it is company-wide, then it touches every little thing. Ideally, there are some companies out there that have been self-managed for years or decades, and this concept is integrated throughout the entire company. So whether it's company financials or what people get paid or how vacation works or how people deal with heavy machinery in their day-to-day, it all follows these same concepts of setting clear expectations, holding people accountable, having some clear conflict resolution process, and so on.
Very interesting. And what is employee experience?
So employee experience is just, and again, this is one of those things that's becoming more popular, thankfully, in recent years, but it's just the idea of treating your employees well and caring about your employees. And again, that has different extremes to it of how far you want to go. Some companies look at employee experience as like, oh, let's give them free soda and a ping pong table. And that's better than nothing. But then on the other side, there are some companies that that employees have counselors and grief counseling if they need it. They have, extremely healthy food options. They have physical trainers on site. They have, all these different things that make people actually feel valued and cared for. So it doesn't feel like they're just an employee. It feels like they're actually a member of a team or a community, and so on. But it's just the idea of taking care of your employees, treating them more as people rather than replaceable numbers.
And do you help with that?
Yeah, so that's really the focus behind what I do, even though virtually all the work I do is tied to the self-management aspect. What kind of drives me in that is that self-management, if done well, like a lot of other organizational changes, improves the employee experience as well. A great way to make people happier is to give them all the benefits of self-management, more autonomy, the ability to innovate more, less micromanagement, and so on.
Could you give an example of where somewhere you interfered and then you did some job with employee experience?
Oh yeah, it's tough to pick just one example. One that comes to mind is, and again, this kind of goes back into the self-management piece as well, but was working with a client, and there were a lot of, from the moment I showed up, there were a lot of like what felt like interpersonal issues, and everyone was saying like, no, like we love the work, but here's how, here's all the problems and drama we're running into. And so one of the things we did was kind of tackling the self-management and employee experience piece simultaneously. Is I went in and helped them create those very clear job expectations, kind of like I was talking about, as well as more refined processes of how do we hold each other accountable, how do we, deal with discipline at most organizations, and creating that process so that instead of these people constantly arguing over who was doing what and, what levels of managers liked and didn't like them, we worked in person and said, okay, for you, your job as the, admin person, what do you need to do? And we worked and built out these expectations with them. And now they had, once that was done, they had far more kind of clear autonomy than they did before. We put it on paper that said, you make these decisions. Your boss doesn't make these decisions around like payroll, for example. Like it doesn't matter what your boss wants or what these other people want. You're the one that has this authority over this big, meaningful decision. And obviously you want to get input and advice and other things, but here's that. And because you have these 5 job expectations, you no longer need a specific work schedule, because as long as you get these 5 things done, it doesn't matter if you show up at 8 o'clock or 3 o'clock, or if you work from home or work in the office, do these 5 things and you're good. And so it's kind of just that increased autonomy that really improved their experience, because it was a small company. They didn't have the money to, put slides in and have work catered every day, lunch catered every day, and all these things. So those little work improvements made a big
Let me make
improve
the
their
question.
employees.
Yeah, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that improved their experience a lot.
Yeah, let me make the question quite harder. Okay, could you please pick one of the pick one of these employees and tell me what exactly did you what expectations did you select for him?
So that's so in general, first it's just the process of figuring out what do they do currently, and that's always a good baseline to start with, and then working with both that individual and whoever is responsible for that individual. In a normal company, to be their boss or manager, to figure out what do they do, and as their manager, over their team or department, what do you need from them to be able to say, yep, that job is successful. So starting with that. So again, part of it was part of it was like making sure that this admin person was also responsible for kind of handling all the budget stuff for the company. This was one of those people that, since it was a small company, they did like 50 different things. And so part of it was we clearly defined, here's the budget we're responsible for, and here's the things that we need. So I don't remember exactly, but it was basically like, in this company Excel document, we need you to track these 5 departments, and we need you to have the ROI of their projects, and but compared to goals, and so on and so forth, and these 5 things, and these all have to balance out to X% of our budget. Like, that is your job to track that and to make sure that works. And if things are going over budget, you have the authority to go to these other teams and say, I need you to cut back. I need you to figure out how to cut costs in some way, because making sure this budget hits X% is your responsibility. But that, although that seems like a lot more work and effort and responsibility, that also means, rather than them having to decide or like figure out every time, what am I allowed to do? How do I not step on toes and so on? Making it very clear for everyone, here's what they're responsible for. Here's what authority you have to make sure you do that, and so on. Yeah, so for the admin, we gave them the expectations of clarifying and keeping a list of the company budget in a sheet that was transparent for the whole company, and the expectation to make sure that budget was hit. So they had the authority to go to these other areas. That was their expectation. Another one of their expectations was making sure they're available for any company, anything that they are needed for. And as the admin, they handled a lot of payroll and things of the sort. So that expectation meant that rather than having to be in the office 8 to 5, as long as they were available, they have done their job. So they could be available on the phone or email. They could come in early when people need to work in early, and so on. And then making sure the office was open for when people needed to come to the office. So those were like 3 of their few explicit expectations.
Yeah, that's so much hard work, as I understand. Like,
yes,
you have no specific plan, you have no specific strategy, you have no specific blueprint to work according to. You just go to the problem and then work from inside the problem. How creative do you need to be able to solve these problems?
That's a great question. I think it varies. Creativity always helps because you can come up with better solutions. But at the end of the day, you don't have to be creative at all. I tend to start with all my clients, just to make things as easy as possible. I say, write down exactly how things are currently working. Like, what are people's current job expectations? Just write that down, and we'll clarify them and, cut out the things that don't make sense and so on. But as a starting point, just do what you're already doing is the easiest way to start. And then with each of those expectations, you look at it and ask, is this objective? So can we clearly say this was done or it wasn't done? Or is there gray areas that are up in the air? And is it explicit? So again, we'll clearly know, is somebody doing this job or are they not doing it? It should be like a yes or no. And then a lot of times you also want to ask, is this important? Like, if one of your job expectations is cleaning your desk, does anyone really care if your desk is clean, if you're hitting numbers, if you're making profit, if you're doing great customer service? Probably not. So then why is that a job expectation? That probably means you could potentially get fired over this just as easily as something else. Like, if it doesn't really matter, get rid of that as an expectation. So you don't need creativity at all. Like, it helps to come up with simpler things at the end of the day. But you can always just start with how you currently do things and then just assess each one at a time and say, how can I improve this one little thing?
Very, very interesting. Let's go to the company level. What are the requirements to implement these concepts by a company?
I'd say the only requirement is a genuine desire to do these things. You don't need money. Any of these things can be done 100% free, no cost whatsoever. Any of them can be done with very little risk, very little time and effort, depending on what you want to implement, how quickly, and so on. The one thing that you do need is the higher ups in the company. as high a level as possible. Whoever is kind of being the face of this change, there has to be a genuine desire to do it. I've seen a lot of companies fail to do these things and make things worse because they, read a book, watch a TED Talk and say, wow, man, my company could be this way too. That sounds great. And then they just give that project to somebody in HR and then never really care about it. And then anytime things aren't working, they just say, it's your job to take care of this. But at the end of the day, it's the company leaders and those who make all the decisions that's going to fall on. So there has to be some kind of desire to actually say, I want to be self-managed. I want to have a better employee experience, even if that reason varies. Some people want to do these things because they want their people to come to work and be happy and feel fulfilled and innovative and all these things. And some people just want to make more money, but they know that treating your employees better and giving them more autonomy will make you more money at the end of the day. So regardless of the reason, you have to really actually want this, because you do have to be willing to change a lot of things to implement this stuff.
Let me give you a comment here. You mentioned the word genuine and you mentioned the word desire. Why does a business environment that is built on principles, money, budgets need humanitarian words and phrases? You speak about genuine and you speak about desire. These are like personal words. You get my point?
I 100% do, and I think that's a great call out. I think it's one of those things where I tend to talk in that sort of way because for me, all these changes are a very humanitarian thing. Giving people autonomy and freedom and value, that's a very good thing to do. But kind of like I previously mentioned, even if you don't ultimately care about like the experience of your employees or their autonomy or whatnot, you just want to do these things because it makes your company more innovative and more effective and lowers turnover. And like, even if you just want those benefits, it's still a good thing to do. But the reason that I say genuine desire is because if you look at these things like employee experience, self-management, a lot of organizational changes out there, on paper, it's nothing but benefit. And I've never met anyone that looks at the list of benefits and says they don't want them. No matter how much, no matter how traditional a company is, if you say, would you like more innovation? Would you like more autonomy? Would you like more profits? Would you like more loyalty, less turnover? Every single person would say, yeah, I want those things. But the reason I say a genuine desire is because everybody wants a lot of things, but not enough to actually put things into it. Like, I'd love to learn how to play harmonica, but not enough to actually try. Like, I just don't want it that much. And so that's really the key, is like any company would say, yes, I want these things, but do you want autonomy for your employees enough to, give up your own power as CEO a little? Okay, well, maybe not. Okay, well, then that's not going to work. Do you, care about, like, do you want to make more profits, but that means some of that profit has to go toward taking care of people? Okay, well, no, not really. And so that's really the thing, is you have to want it enough to be willing to do the work that's necessary to achieve that.
Okay, let me ask you a question more about companies and about businesses. Isn't it strange that these companies have this huge human effect and influence despite being business-like and money-based?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Like, okay, now you are speaking about people giving the power and deciding and having a genuine desire. Like, these people can affect how much their businesses benefit or their businesses can gain, depending on their own decisions. Mm-hmm. Like, how can these be businesses and companies, and at the end of the day, they are affected by personal opinions? Maybe I just like to be bossy, that's why I will not allow Paul to do his work. So you get my point. Like, how much effect do like the personal or the human sides of people affect these businesses?
At the end, I think ultimately everything is affected by people's decisions. Most of the time, the only people's decisions and perspectives that matter are the ones at the very, very top. It's like the CEO, maybe the board, and a handful of people in HR. Like, it's these people's personal opinions and their beliefs and their attitudes that will make 100% of the decisions for everybody else, because nobody has the power to do anything. You go into any company and there will be some people that are like, I wish this worked differently. I wish we could implement this. And I wish we treated people, this way, but they literally have no power to do that. So I think at the end of the day, it is only people's desire that changes anything. And there's a lot of times, implementing these things that, a company will pull all their managers in the room to say, hey, we're thinking about implementing this thing where there's no more managers. And they'll all be like, well, no, we don't want that because we worry about our own job security. Like, no matter how humanitarian you are, if you think that the change is going to get you fired and you won't be able to feed your family, like, even my job is to implement this stuff, and I also wouldn't make that sacrifice. And so I think that's important to consider as you're implementing these things, is a lot of times either what you do or how you do it kind of has to be tailored to meet each individual's needs. There might be company owners that say, I like the idea of this, but I'm really not willing to take any risks. Like, I've tried real hard to get this company off the ground, and I'm not going to take any risks. So you can still implement these changes, but you might have to do it in smaller bits and pieces over a longer period of time. So there's no risk involved because you're implementing it such like a low, minute level.
What are the benefits of this approach?
I think there's a lot of different benefits for both general employee experience stuff and organizational self-management. For the self-management side, you obviously get more autonomy and personal responsibility in your work, which for a lot of people, that in itself is a game changer. It can make work far more efficient and productive. And a lot of times you'll get a lot more innovation out of it because people can actually make their own decisions without needing approval or work on other things they normally wouldn't be able to work on. So there's a lot of benefits in that regard. And having more ownership and autonomy and responsibility can make people feel a lot more valued in their work, of like, oh, I know I'm the graphics guy. I no longer need to, design only the things somebody tells me to or whatnot. And on the employee experience side, same stuff as in anybody's life. If you are treated like you actually matter, if people ask what's going on, when you're clearly struggling, if you get some leeway and help when you need it, if you're connected with other people, and so on and so forth, that not only helps you be far more productive in your work, that helps you in your personal life because hopefully you'll be less likely to take stresses and, anger home to your family because you're like, oh no, my work actually helps me with the stuff that I'm struggling with in my personal life. And again, that helps the company as well because, again, more productivity, but people will likely be a lot more loyal to the company, be willing to go through the hard times with the company. There'll be a lot less turnover and so on. So with all these things, there's a lot of benefit for the person and the business as well.
What are the downsides and disadvantages of this approach?
On the surface, the immediate downsides are for the people, which I've never personally encountered, but statistically, there are some people out there who love having all the power and bossing everyone around. Like, if that's what you like, don't do this. This is going to be awful. You're not going to, there will be nothing in this that you like. Aside from that, because I'd say that's pretty rare. I've never experienced anyone like that personally. The only downsides aren't to the system itself, because again, whether it's self-management or employee experience or any of these sorts of things, on paper, it's nothing but benefit. Caring about people, treating them well, innovation, autonomy, so on. On paper, nothing but benefits. But like with any other change, all the downsides come from how it's implemented. If you do it faster than the company, if you try to implement faster than the company is capable of, it's going to wreck things. If you try to implement systems that maybe just the culture and the environment of that company, it doesn't work for them, it's going to be a struggle and a challenge. Even if you have a great system, I've seen companies implement like great systems that are very simple and easy, but they do it so terribly that things work out poorly. And I've seen other companies implement systems that I think are absurdly complicated and difficult. And it goes great because they were so patient and they took time to train everyone, made sure everyone was on the same page. So I'd say that the drawbacks aren't with these concepts themselves because they're kind of just high level idealistic concepts, but how it's implemented can either make or break a company. And I'd say that's really where the risks are.
Very interesting. How popular are these concepts in business?
In the last few years, they definitely become way more popular. With self-management, you have books like Beyond Empowerment by Doug Kirkpatrick and Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. And then you have books like Employee Experience by Ben Witter. And so it's becoming a lot more popular in recent years. In the grand scheme of things, it's still very slim. And that popularity also changes drastically by kind of geography and culture. Like these concepts are way more popular in Western Europe than they are in America, for example.
What would you need to make them more popular in America?
So I think there's a lot of things, and this could dive into a very deep hole. But at the end of the day, I think for America, because all the laws, all the policies, the entire structure of the system is almost entirely built on making as much money as possible. So most companies, I don't think it's going to hit a tipping point in America until there becomes proof. Like many case studies with like proven examples of do this and it will make you more money. Like once that happens, I think a lot more people will start doing it. But other than that, I think it's just going to kind of grow genuinely, especially with the younger generations as they start forming more and more businesses. We're seeing a lot more companies that are starting up and people say, I want my company to be transparent, to care about people, to be purpose-driven and do something for the world. So I think they're definitely becoming a lot more popular.
Why are people evidence-driven?
I don't think people are evidence-driven. I say that solely for like the big companies. They need proof that this is going to work. And even that is unlikely. But I think in some cases, if there's a proven, tangible, like step-by-step, do this and you will make more money, and that's proven time and time again, I think that may convince some people. And that's just for, kind of as I mentioned earlier, some companies will do the right thing, even if it's not for the right reasons. Like I may not actually care about my employees, but if I learn that treating them better will make me more money, I'm going to treat them better. So I'm doing the right thing for not a good reason, but it's still a good change. So I think in those cases, like, the really big, really successful companies, like, Amazon, for example, a lot of people are like, oh, would these concepts work in Amazon? Theoretically, yes. Like they could implement these, but they are so successful from a purely profit standpoint that there is absolutely the likelihood of any of the people making as much money as they are on this to say like, let's risk ruining everything for the chance at doing it better. At that big of a scale is so slim. Whereas other companies, especially like smaller startup companies or who have the flexibility, especially companies that are privately owned, they have a lot more wiggle room to try these things without having to worry about like, well, we can just do what works for us without having to worry about shareholders and investors and whatnot. We can try these things.
Very interesting. Okay, let's go to technology. How far does modern technology affect the dynamics of businesses currently?
I think it affects it tremendously for a number of reasons, a lot of which we're seeing become much more obvious ever since COVID-19 hit. There were some companies that once it hit, they were, at the end of the day, not affected very much because they were like, oh, well, everyone works remotely anyway. The few people at the office, we'll have them work from home. We'll, send them a laptop, whatever, and then we're fine. And other companies that have been extremely successful still struggled tremendously with this. And I think technology helps a lot in several aspects. One, it allows people to work remotely, and that has a lot of benefits on its own. But especially in times like this, where there's so much flexibility of people can work from anywhere. So no matter what happens, if the office burns down, the business can keep going because everyone works remotely. And that wouldn't be possible without several tools, like Zoom, other webinar tools, Trello, Slack, and so on, being able to communicate far more quickly across any amount of distance. All those things help. Different project boards like Trello and Jira and otherwise allow people to keep working on things without having to walk up to other people's desks or sitting in a war room. And then there's tools that are specific to any sort of change. So if you're looking to, whether it's move to self-organization or just transition your company in some way, there's tools out there that you can clearly lay out. Here's how our organization is structured. Let's create different teams and circles. Everyone can see who does what. So there's things like that. There's employee engagement tools that allow people to bring up complaints or promote feedback instantly and things of the sort. So I think technology helps tremendously. No matter what you're trying to do, there's probably a tool out there that can at least help.
Okay, now you have been a corporate employee, and now you are having your own business, or quite starting your own business. What are the main things you have learned as a person?
Honestly, that list could go on forever. Who I am as a person today is radically different from who I was like 3 years ago. I can't think of anything about who I am that was the same as I used to be, just because of the things I've learned and as I've grown, and especially my own personal challenges. For a lot of my life, I didn't really have many challenges. Everything was fine, but that meant I didn't really know how to empathize with people super well, like especially in the workplace setting. I was just like, no, just do your job. Like I do it. Why can't you do it? Like I didn't understand depression. I didn't understand what lack of clarity was like. I didn't understand what it felt like to, be singled out and hated. Like I didn't know any of that stuff. So, experiencing a lot of these things, either directly for myself or, while I was working with companies and I saw people that I cared about suffering day after day and coming to me and talking to me about it and seeing how real this was. Those are the things that not only helped me grow as a person, but made me a lot better at my job, because now when somebody's, when I'm talking to a client and a CEO is like, well, Billy never does his job, the old me would have been like, okay, well, let's get rid of him. But now I think like, well, let me talk to Billy. Let's see what's going on. And every time there's like a work-related reason behind it. Oh, I want to do the best job I can, but I don't know what my job is, or they keep, doing this and this. And what I've seen time and time again is that nearly everybody wants to do good work and contribute and be valued, but everybody requires a very specific environment to be able to do that. And that might look a little different for everybody. And so being able to understand what those different individual needs are, even if I don't personally feel that way at all, that helps tremendously.
What else would you like to say?
I think all I would say is with any of these concepts, any like new ways of working, that whether they seem very woohoo, silly, like what's up with this, I don't trust it, or you love the idea of it, first go into any of these things with some skepticism. There is no one size fits all solution out there. There are some things that can do tremendous good for your company, but again, it's all going to be how it's implemented. There's some things that they'll sell you on. Here's everything it'll fix and solve for you, and it's going to make everyone's life worse. So go into any of these with a little bit of skepticism, and either find a system, something you want to implement that speaks to you and your company's direct needs, or if you are looking for help, find somebody that's willing to work with you on your terms, because almost any company wants all these benefits, but not every company has the time or has the staff to do it, like to dedicate people to implementing this. Not everyone has the company or the money to hire the best consultants. There is always some system, and there is always some person out there who's willing to work with you, whatever your budget is, whatever your time constraints are, whatever you want to change. and how you want to change it. So find that, because otherwise the risks will outweigh the potential benefits and you'll never do it. Whereas even if you make tiny little changes, that's still better than where you were.
It has been so insightful and so informative talking to you, Paul. I really appreciate your help and your input.
Yeah, and I truly appreciate the chat and your incredible questions. I wasn't expecting them. They were super insightful and made me think a lot. So I appreciate that.
Thank you so much indeed for your time.